Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week, I am joined by Myrtle Dawes. Myrtle is a senior executive within the energy sector with a focus on net zero, which is going to be an exciting topic for me, actually. Myrtle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So delighted to be here. I'm Myrtle Dawes, Chief Executive at the Net Zero Technology Centre. And I've been working here for over 5 years, but started my career back in 1991 working with BP.
Okay, so how did you get started off in the energy sector then?
Completely by accident. I grew up in London. I really enjoyed sciences and mathematics, etc., but didn't really expect or even know about careers like this. At one point, thought I wanted to be a dancer, but I was convinced to come on, Mel, I'll have a second choice, and I ended up going to university with to be fair, the help of my teachers, and even then didn't really know what I wanted to do, and ended up at having studied chemical engineering, ended up getting a job with BP, expecting it to be an onshore job, and ended up working offshore, which was something I didn't even know about. But you know what? It's been a really, really fulfilling career. And I would even go as far as to say that when I started in the energy sector, there was a lot of environmental and safety work going on. And I indeed was a safety engineer for 10 years. We just had a Piper Alpha. And so there was a lot of attention to that detail. And I found it to be a really fulfilling career. And I suppose latterly, with the discussion around net zero and climate, etc., we've really had to take more seriously how we're actually doing energy. But still, I'm kind of committed to actually energy and making it as affordable and clean as possible.
Okay, so how did you find going offshore when you were quite younger? Because that's a huge step, especially for maybe a female.
Yeah, I will confess to you, when I got the job, I didn't know I was going offshore. I really didn't. I had applied for a job at BP Engineering as was. I ended up, due to a mix-up, applying for BP Exploration. Thought it was still exciting at the time. I didn't swim. I was afraid of flying. So going off on a helicopter offshore was very scary. And if I confess, it was exciting, but I was apprehensive as well. So even though it was exciting technically, and working for a company like BP was quite exhilarating, going offshore to work in the middle of the North Sea, most people haven't been there. It's one of the most challenging places to work on the planet, the North Sea, in terms of the weather, the waves, etc. And then, of course, as a young woman going offshore, working with predominantly men, I was, one of the first women offshore working on a rotation, and then, of course, the culture there was a bit different at the time. Things that you wouldn't expect, pornography, all that kind of good stuff was there in open show, things that you would not expect now. But the one thing I will say is, notwithstanding that culture, I was very, very well treated by the staff there. They started my training in engineering and didn't say, oh, well, she's just a girl. They did say that, but mainly because I was just a girl, that they weren't used to having women offshore. And I think even though we've got a long way to go compared to that time, it's chalk and cheese.
Okay. I was going to ask you, were you on a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotation? Because that is quite hard. Because I've been offshore myself, but it's never been more than a week for me. Yeah. And I think I'm always glad to get home, actually.
Yeah. Demanding, and I mean, look, it was a culture shock. I mean, you think it's a culture shock for me, but you have to also remember that a lot of the men working offshore had also been in the merchant navy, never really worked with women before. This was also quite novel for them. For everybody, there was a bit of novelty. Where do we sleep? Where do you have a shower? All this kind of good stuff. I mean, it required a lot of change, and so I mean, I don't go offshore anymore, but the last time I went off, I was really pleased just to see how far things had come. And not just that, they've got survival suits and personal protection equipment now for women, which actually fits women rather than trying to fit into things that didn't really, suit us at all.
Okay, so from your career then, what was your next step? Did you come
Yeah,
back on shore?
absolutely. Because to be fair, as I said, I didn't really enjoy, helicopter flight. So I actually left quite soon, and I went back to London. That's where I grew up, and I worked for a small company doing risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis. Amazing topic to go in, and all around safety. So things like what's the safety levels on things like the Channel Tunnel, which was very exciting, on what at the time was the Jubilee Line extension and various airports. So look, started looking at how we apply engineering to real life decision making, which is about safety and what's appropriate and acceptable or tolerable from a risk perspective. And I think that training that I got there was quite instrumental in my thinking, because it forced you to always think about the decisions in front of you and have you made or are you recommending the optimal decisions. And I continued in safety really for the next decade. I worked for various oil and gas companies. I got the opportunity to work abroad. I worked for a year in Australia, in Melbourne. That was fabulous. And I also, towards the end of the decade, worked in Newfoundland in Canada for a year, and that was also great. So really enjoyed both the travel, the opportunity to meet lots of new people, but also the work. And during that period, I really enjoyed the engineering. I mean, it was great.
Okay, it sounds like you've had a really fulfilling career. So, what has been your major highlight of your career?
The major highlight. Yeah, I think probably two. So I will say that when I absolutely enjoy technical work, and being a lead engineer was very satisfying to me. And to some extent, I say to people that going in every day, knowing that whatever is thrown at you, you'll be able to address that day, is a really fulfilling and very a kind of stress-free way to operate. And I really enjoyed it because I liked the technical challenge. But what I will say is also when I got my first senior leadership position at Centrica, I'd been working, running projects, large projects, really enjoying that. And when I was offered the capital projects director role, I was completely shocked. And I said, oh, well, maybe someone else can do it and I'll go and do some technical work. And I said, no, no, Myrtle, you do it. And so and I've not looked back, but that was, I think, a highlight, because I think even then hadn't thought that, I could do a job like that. And then I did it and I loved it. And I thought, yes, I'll do more of this. So I think what I've learned is you sometimes think you know what you want to do next. But the challenge you get from your peers and your leaders about doing something different is very important, because until you do the role, you don't know. And someone like myself who wasn't naturally ambitious, had I not got the nudges along the way, I think I'd still have been doing safety engineering, because I probably would still have loved it to this day.
Okay, do you really think that it's been easy climbing the career ladder? And then I was going to wait to say, do you think that the glass ceiling still exists?
Look, I'd say the glass ceilings has holes in it. So there's no doubt that you can climb the career ladder. And I know very successful women, if you judge success by climbing the ladder, then of course you can climb the ladder. I don't think that it stops you. There are difficulties in doing so. And there's difficulties to do so, not just because of the workplace and culture, but what you want to do. when I had my two children, I didn't necessarily want to go and work abroad. I didn't want to travel too much, and that's because I wanted that lifestyle. And I lived in North Wales for 18 years, and I absolutely loved it. And at one time I worked for a company that said, look, if you want your next career kind of goal to be met, you need to go to Houston. And I didn't want to go to Houston. So I think for myself, I'd say you can do it, but you shouldn't think that there aren't any sacrifices that you necessarily need to make. So, you can have it all, but sometimes having it all might mean that you may need to make a decision you don't want to. I loved living in North Wales, and actually I thought I would retire there. Not quite, but so I think you can definitely make it through. But I have to say, it's not for everybody, and it's not necessarily going to give everyone the satisfaction that they want, because being purely working in leadership and executive leadership is not the same as working as a manager or etc. So you need to know that you want it, because there is sacrifice and difficult decisions required of leaders, and sometimes that's not the kind of job that you want.
Okay, I was going to ask you, because that was a really interesting, actually, comment. You said that working as an executive at an executive level is different from working as a manager. For
Hmm.
a younger audience, what is the difference? And yeah, what is the difference?
Okay, so if I think about when I started project managing, I had a scope which, even if it was a large project, it was defined. I had a team, and with careful management and using of the techniques that you know about, I think you can get through that. I mean, with the probably the most difficult being the learning around how you work with people in a team and how you get the best from them. And so you can get through that. But there's always another layer that if things are going wrong, you can count on. I think with the leaders, your horizon is so much longer. So, if I look at what I've been looking at since I took over as CEO, I've always been looking at least 2 years out. And to some extent, when I'm talking about something or asking something to be done, people might say, well, but that's not the urgent thing today. And I'm thinking, look, I can't work on the urgent thing today. I'm expecting you guys to take care of that. So the horizon for leaders is much further out, which then has the impact of saying people thinking maybe that you're not in touch with what's going on today, and maybe your agenda doesn't appear to be what everyone else is thinking about. And it can get a bit lonely there, because you're looking at things which are sometimes existential to the business and talking with the board about these things, which is not always the same dialogue that you're having with your team. Now, of course, you are anchored in today, because today's business and performance is also important. But what I would say is the manager is looking at leading teams, but leading organizations is a different kettle of fish, and does require you to start thinking about the things which are not day to day, and in fact are not even month to month, which is a different thing to do.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So, what made you decide that you wanted to progress to executive level?
I don't think the decision, there wasn't a one day that I decided to do this. I think that to some extent, that first move at Centrica to becoming a director, I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And then did it. And so there's a natural progression. I work for a small organization now. I mean, if I was in a bigger organization, I might be a senior executive, but not the CEO. So I don't think there was a decision, but there's definitely been a decision to stay doing what I'm doing. And there's been a decision to move to a smaller company so that I could have more oversight, and perhaps my personal contribution could be more easily recognized and more influenced, because that's what I wanted to do. And, at the center that we've got here, it is good to think that either if someone says, Mel, this needs to be done, and gives me that advice, or I think so, I know that I have the tools along with the board to actually go and get that done. And that's quite satisfying.
Okay, so have you had any career disasters then?
Absolutely. So look, I've had a low life. I'll describe one low life and I'll describe one disaster. So I had a low life, which I think happens to us all, or some of us throughout our career, where I went through a period where I consider that I was bullied, and it was a very upsetting period for me. On the and in retrospect, and now I think it would be very difficult to get away with that type of behavior. But it was very upsetting, and I really didn't want to go into work, and it had the impact on me of making me have to turn up for work very well every single day because I didn't want anything untoward to happen because I made a mistake, etc. So strangely enough, it did make me better and more careful about how I worked, how I thought about things, etc. And but that was a very, very tough time. And I think, in the end, I actually did fight back and actually, I think came out of it okay. But that was a low life, and I sympathize with anyone who's going through work in this situation. Apart from saying, over time, one of you disappears, either the bully or you, just like it happens at school. So either leave school or you leave school. So I'd say that. But I think in terms of career disasters, I think the worst thing is I had a new position. I had no in a new part of the business, and I had very little kind of experience in this new part of the business, and we did have a lot some operational failures, and it was a very, very difficult role for 18 months to 2 years. And I could have run away. I was given the opportunity to run away from it and go back and do something different, but I decided to stick by it. And I think it did teach me a lot, actually. I learned a lot and it taught me a lot. It taught me that, when you're getting the training, when you're from on various tools and kind of just when people are, you go on your course, this is how you do this is how you manage that. These skills are very important, and they become really, really important when you're no longer working in an environment where you're familiar with everything, where you can't use technical judgment to help you through and you don't know lots of people. Then it really comes down to your management competency, your leadership skills, etc. Then that's all that you have, and they are very important, and they get honed during this period because that's all you have. You know you can't cope on, well, I know I've seen someone else do this before and this is how it's done. You really have to rely on those skills. And so it was very, very, very poor operational performance, but perhaps some of my best leadership skills that I've ever kind of exhibited.
Okay. It is difficult navigating that type of situations where you may feel that you're bullied.
Mm.
It is very, very, very challenging. I do appreciate that. But I was going to go back to maybe a positive note. Do you think it is important to be flexible enough to travel in your career if you want to progress?
Um, so I think it depends, to be fair, on the career. I mean, so, if you don't like travel, you couldn't ever be a pilot, could you? So I think there's levels. Some careers, especially if you're working for a very large multinational company, the travel is more about making sure that you can get a good grounding in the business, that you can understand the culture of what's going on so that you can actually be a better leader. And so it's not a requirement, but it does enhance your ability to lead that organization. But I don't think it's a necessity to do so. And you can have a very good career by not traveling. But some careers are enhanced by that international experience. And I think if you look at, some of the very large companies in the world, especially outside of the US, you'll see that it's a good trade. I meet some senior leaders, and not only are they well traveled, they speak several languages, they're very accomplished. And so, that means that if you go somewhere and you meet people, that you've got more opportunities for communication. So I'd say for some jobs it's useful. just because it makes you more able to understand the things that come up in your business. So if you're working for, I don't know, a very large mining company with business all over the world, you want to know you want to understand what it's like maybe working in a mine in South Africa and have met some of that team, as well as working, maybe on a site in the US. So, because these are all part of the teams that you're leading.
Okay. Okay. I understand. Yeah, I appreciate that. That is quite a good answer. So I was going to ask you, you work in net zero.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, it would be criminal not to.
Yeah.
How is the net zero going?
You mean globally or in here in the UK?
Yeah, well, we'll
Globally?
start with the UK anyway.
Yeah. So, I'll first to say, look, that net zero, like everything, means several things to several people. To some people, net zero is synonymous with climate. Some it's like energy transition. What I will say is, on paper, the UK has actually progressed quite well with net zero since 1990. We perhaps don't like the methods because some of that has been manufacturing has moved outside of the UK, etc. But even with that, there has been a lot of change because we did that massive change from coal to natural gas, and actually and had and have very efficient plants, etc. So overall, there's been a reduction, but this journey towards net zero is slightly different. I think there's two bits for me. The first is what I call emissions reduction, which is actually what affects the climate. How can we continue to do what we're doing whilst reducing emissions at the same time? And I think that's a challenge, and it's both a policy and a technological challenge, which we need to get on with. I think the counter to that as well then is, and how do we build out the renewables or the low carbon solutions so that they're available to consumers? And that is happening, but actually not at the pace that everyone would like. And I think that's problematic for us here in the UK. And obviously, I think the focus that we're getting from governments, and I do say governments because it's not just one government, it's not a political issue per se. I think we've got increasing kind of focus from them. But there's no doubt if I was to sit here and say, am I confident that by 2050 the world will be at net zero? I can't say that. And having said that, there is a good likelihood it might well be, but perhaps not for the reasons that we want. So, and I think if we take an example of somewhere like China, China both emits a lot of CO2, but it's also the biggest place in terms of the consumption and production of renewable energy, the best storage in the world. I mean, and they do far more renewable energy than the whole world, basically. They are so far ahead. So the issue for us is, when is that going to be that tipping point that gets like places like China, etc., that they are actually on the way down in terms of renewables? And one might say, without looking at their motives, are they motivated by climate change? I don't know. Or are they motivated by energy independence? And this is why I say it rather depends why you're having renewables. So there's good economic reasons for doing some of these things. There's good climate reasons for doing these things as well. But there's great technology on the horizon, but essentially this is a policy issue, it's a technology issue, and it's something that we'll have to do as a planet, because having net zero in the UK doesn't help and having net zero in any one place doesn't help. We need to come together. As a planet, I think we do have the tools and the ability. And I always say to people, if we can be thinking of building a base on the moon, we're thinking of going to Mars, I think we can adjust our climate in terms of parts per million of CO2 if we put our mind to it.
I do agree, actually. I do actually agree. But do you think there is the available technology to do that?
We could make that technology. Yeah, we could accelerate. I don't see any reason why we couldn't. If I was to say, I'd think technologically we're more than capable of doing this. what I think we need to be cautious of is the amount of resources, and that's what I'm talking about minerals, rare earth minerals. I'm talking about just the amount of resources to rebuild this world in a low carbon fashion. That in its own right is quite staggering. And we talk about the energy side, but if you talk about the mining side of how many new mines, 10, 20 times the number of mines that we have at the moment to mine all of these things for us. It's quite extraordinary. So, there has to be a focus, I think, on efficiency as well, because if we try to mine our way out of this, will also cause a lot of damage. And a lot of these mines are in places in the world where you want to be sure that you're not causing harm as well. So I think we can get there. I see no reason why you couldn't, apart from geopolitical. I think there are great pieces of technology to use, but perhaps the most exciting technology that I've seen recently, and I've been talking about it for years, but look, someone is going to build this fantastic solar array, and I think the Chinese have said that they're going to do it. And if they could get this space solar array up, I think the quotes are that this solar array can capture energy equivalent in 1 year equivalent to all the oil and gas that we've burnt ever. So, there is technology. They say they can do this by 2035. So if there's a space race to put up solar arrays, then maybe we'll get to net zero.
Do you think that's the answer?
No, but I think it's part of the answer. And the reason I think it's part of the answer is if you look at the data, it's not just about us reducing emissions. We are using more energy annually in an extraordinary way. It just increases. We're not reducing the amount of energy that we're using. And if you look at the number of billions of people in the world who actually haven't even got access to basic energy, it's going to increase. There is an energy imbalance in the world between the very, very poor and say the 1 billion of us living in relative comfort. And we can't ignore that. We can't ignore and say that we're going to leave 4 billion people in relative poverty, unable to progress, etc. That's not going to happen. And if you accept that, then we have to find a way of getting clean energy. And part of it is this, and I jest about space solar, but solar, wind, all these others, these are all relevant to what we're doing. I even think carbon capture, all of this is all relevant.
I think so too, actually. I do think so too. So I'm going to go back to your career, which was amazing. Actually, it was a very insightful discussion about net zero. But going back to your career, do you have any advice to give to the up and coming generation on how to break into the energy space and what their career might look like in years to come?
Yeah. So I think if we just talk about energy generally, there definitely is a skill shortage. And in reality, the skill shortage is not amongst what I'd call very new skills that no one else has. I mean, it's really, a lot of the skills that are currently used in the energy industry will continue to be used. There will be some more specific ones. So I think it's still the same thing. You've got to, if you want to be in energy, depending on where you're going, then it's either STEM, but it's humanities. We still need lawyers, etc. But perhaps the biggest skill that I have found personally is you've got to continue to be able learn to learn, and that is that you've done something and then you're given a new job and you've got to learn how to do that. You've got to learn how to do different things. And if I look at my career, I started as a petroleum engineer. I've worked through safety engineer, project manager, planning and dispatch manager. I've worked on boards, now, CEO at a technology center. This is all required to learn new things, and it shouldn't. And if you're willing to do that and you're able to do that, you have to. This is a skill in its own right to learn. Then you can do whatever comes up. And I think for the new generation, that's important because the pace of change is enormous. And I think that's necessary for them to thrive.
I do agree. So I'm maybe going to wrap up with one maybe final question. If you could turn back time, what advice would you give your younger self?
I don't think I'd give her any advice. I think just take it as it goes. I've been very satisfied. I think any decision that I might have made, I don't necessarily think will have led me to a better or worse position than I'm in. I've been very happy with the people I've met. But I think, live a little bit in the moment. And I did that. Let's not always be thinking about what is your next job. Enjoy your current job, enjoy your colleagues, enjoy the work that you're doing. Because to be fair, if I think back to 1991 and where we are now, the time has gone really, really quickly.
It has, actually. It has. And you have had such an amazing career, and it has been such a pleasure to talk with you today. So I'm going to wrap it up. That's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Myrtle for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.